Following the end of the Human Covenant War, Spartan super soldiers who had previously served in the UNSC Army, Navy, and Air Force were consolidated into a separate but equal branch of service. The eponymous Spartan operations would be dedicated towards unconventional warfare, emphasizing sufficiency, stealth, speed, and coordination. But was this a good idea? I don't necessarily think so. Just as a quick refresher, let's talk about military branches for a second. As the armed forces of a nation grow in size, it makes sense to divide them into various subdivisions for administration and logistical purposes. Branches are based around a specific role that they perform, with the most common, an Army, Navy, and Air Force, responsible for land warfare, naval warfare, and aerial warfare respectively. Of course, there are plenty of others: strategic deterrence branches, military logistics services, cyber warfare, military medicine, maritime security, the list goes on. And these branches might also heavily differ between nations. What might be an independent branch in the armed forces of one country might merely be a component service of a different branch in another. The People's Liberation Army, for example, maintains an independent rocket force responsible for strategic and tactical missiles, while the United States Armed Forces distributes the same authority across a functional combatant command, whose service components include those from other branches and institutions. If all this sounds complicated, that's because it is. The decisions and factors surrounding how to organize and divide the armed forces of a country are enormously complex, always evolving, and subject to external, usually political pressures. Not to mention that what makes sense on paper might be a disaster when actually implemented. So let's get back to Spartan operations. Given its role within the UNSC, I would classify it as a special forces branch. And as it happens, we have examples in our own contemporary world of countries with their own separate special forces branches, such as Poland, and those without them, such as the United States. This is great because it allows us to look at the arguments for and against such independent branches. To boil down a complex subject into a few key points, proponents of a separate special forces branch argue that with independence comes political influence, bureaucratic weight, and a greater command of resources. Commanders of conventional forces, they claim, don't always understand how best to use special forces, meaning their unique capabilities are wasted, and as a result, these units might take higher casualties than necessary. Opponents would counter by saying that an independent branch would burden forces that are supposed to be highly nimble, reactive, and unconventional with non-operational concerns like bureaucracy, institution building, procurement, and personnel issues. Now, far be it from me to determine who is right and who is wrong in this argument, but I think the UNSC has made an enormous mistake by taking a wishy-washy approach with the Spartan branch. Now, earlier, I compared Spartan operations to a special forces branch, but that's not entirely accurate. While the role of the service is the same, it doesn't unite all of the UNSC special forces under it, only the Spartans. The UNSC Marine Corps has orbital drop shock troopers, while the Office of Naval Intelligence has its own special security force, for some reason, and both of these are notably excluded. And while I can't find any direct information on them, the UNSC Air Force likely has a unit similar to the modern French Commando Parachute Group. The UNSC Army probably has something the equivalent of the British Special Air Service or the American Green Berets. And the UNSC Navy probably has something similar to the American Navy SEALs. So while the Spartans get their own branch, all these units are staying within their respective services. And because only the Spartans were integrated into this new branch, the UNSC is getting the worst of both worlds here. It's simultaneously operating both an independent special forces branch and dividing its special forces across the remaining branches. The situation gets even worse when you consider that Spartan operation recruits from these other branches. What admiral in the UNSC Navy is going to be eager to see his best special forces members be transferred to a different branch? It's a recipe for toxic inter-service rivalry. A suitable comparison might be if the UNSC developed a very capable type of bomber, far more effective than anything that came before. Would it make sense to split these bombers alone off into their own new branch separate from the Air Force? No. So why did the UNSC do this? Well, there's a few vague mentions that the Spartans shouldn't be under anyone's thumb, and that as an independent branch, they now have more leeway. But that doesn't seem right. In practical terms, they're now completely reliant on the other branches for recruitment and equipment, branches without any real motive to help them. A separate branch just for the Spartans almost comes across as more of an ego thing, as if Spartans are just too good to be included with the rest of the military. There's a few contradictory mentions over whether or not Spartan operations fall under HighCom and NavCom. The implication seems to be that the Spartans are just too important and elite to be included, but the whole purpose of these commands is to integrate the different branches together so they don't work against each other's interests in specific environments. If both the Navy, for example, and Spartans have special forces on a battlefield, it's important that each branch knows that. Excluding the Spartans doesn't make them better than everyone else, it impacts their ability to conduct a mission. Now, normally, I'd be willing to give the UNSC the benefit of the doubt here. I am judging their decision based on a few snippets of information, and I don't have a clear view of the larger picture. Maybe there is some element related to the Spartans and the process of augmenting them that makes a separate branch completely practical. Surely, the UNSC studied the performance of the Spartans in the war against the Covenant, weighed the costs and benefits before deciding a separate branch was the way to go. Except we do know that's not what happened. After the UNSC Infinity was briefly captured by insurrectionists and then retaken by Spartans, Commander Musa Ghanem leveraged the victory to achieve the independence for the branch. Here is what he said. "Spartans are why you are still in possession of the Infinity. You have thanked, yes, but now you will pay the bill that is due. As of today, Spartans stand on their own, not as Navy or Ani assets. We are our own branch as of now. Spartans, like Navy or Army or Marines, are UNSC. Spartans are humanity's first line of defense against threats from within or without. Spartans are what will see us through the darkness ahead into the dawn beyond." I suppose this is supposed to be inspirational and brave, but Ghanem here instead comes across more petulant and cynical. Here is an officer in the UNSC referring to national service as some kind of transaction. "My Spartans saved the Infinity, now you owe me. Ask not what the UNSC can do for you, Commander Ghanem." But this speech is also heavy on melodrama and light on details. If someone in the UNSC were to respond, "Commander Ghanem, we have concerns that compelling the Spartans into their own formal service would force them to behave in a way intrinsically opposed to the purpose of their existence. An independent branch would divert the Spartans massively and disastrously from their original intent to be operationally focused towards redundant human capital realignment and imposed bureaucratic and institutional concerns, all to fix a problem that hasn't been clearly defined." Faced with that, "Spartans are what will see us through the darkness," isn't much of an argument.